You're listening to the Southampton Delivery Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the Southampton Football Club and all of the SFC fans.
If you want to have guarantees, you have to buy a washing machine.
Monte with a scooping header in!
We don't lose a match, either we win or we learn. And today we learned.
It's infield to Mane, 25 yards out. Lovely ball for Dele. Onside, 1-0! Blue fast shot! Oh my word!
Unbelievable. We ran around the pitch like Bambi on ice. It was very, very embarrassing to watch.
And now, your host, Matt Markstone.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Southampton Delivery Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the Southampton Football Club and all of the SFC fans. My name is Matt Markstone. I'm the host of the show, and no matter where you are, no matter how you may be listening, whether this is your first time or you've been here before, thank you for making the show part of your day. I hope that you enjoy it. And the first thing I like to do is just say welcome to the new year. Happy New Year. I hope that you are feeling well. And even if you're listening a few days after, I hope that you had a good new year, and I hope that 2018 didn't kick you too hard on its way out. But this year, obviously we have things that we'd like to remember about 2018 as a Saints fan. It's probably things we'd like to forget. And hopefully 2019, everybody continues to move onwards and upwards. And, we actually push ourselves. And I think that's one of my goals this year is just to kind of push myself to not be so safe with the things that I do. Not that I'm going to risk physical danger or anything like that, but hopefully you get it. Push yourself a little bit, test yourself a little bit. I think that's all kind of good because sometimes we get complacent. And my guest this week, Chris Macchi, he is maybe one of those reasons that I would say that I need to push myself just a little bit. He's an American. He lives in London, and the things that he's done since the time that he has graduated from college and the decisions he's made, he has put himself in some situations and worked with some people that I think most of us would leap at the chance to be able to do. And part of getting him on the show was I wanted to talk to him about that. I wanted to know how he went from attending a small school on the East Coast of the United States to living in London and working in world football and helping to spread the story and the love that so many people have and helping connect so many people around the world to the game that they love and that we love and doing that. And so I'll be honest that I was a little bit hesitant to ask him to be on the show. And at the same time, he was a little hesitant to come on, not because he didn't think that it was worth his time, but because he didn't think that he maybe was worthy of coming on the show. It's something that we talked about. And it just goes to show you that all of us have a little bit of that doubt, because I think that the story that Chris has is so inspiring. And I think that it'll do a lot and can say a lot for a lot of people. So whether you're like me and you have your career and you're kind of set in it, or whether you're looking for a job or whether you're still in school, I'd encourage you to listen to this, to share it with some friends, because I think that just taking some of these things to heart and hearing some of the things that Chris has been able to do, it just means that you can do those things too if you want. And so it takes some breaks from time to time, but you can make things happen. And so because of all of that, I couldn't think of a better way to bring in the new year than with this episode. And so this is my conversation with Chris Macchi. We don't talk about Manchester City. We don't talk about West Ham. We don't talk about any kind of specific Saints game. This is not what this episode is about. This episode is about Chris and his story and football and kind of how he got there. And we'll move basically from early kind of life and the role football played in his life up through college and internships and everything else to eventually moving to London and doing the work that he does now. So it is quite lengthy. It's about an hour and a half long, maybe a little longer. So feel free to break it up into chunks if you need, or if you don't have that much time. But I would encourage you to kind of listen all the way through. And if you're into that sort of thing, if you like this kind of stuff, please let me know, because from time to time, I do need to pre-record episodes to make sure that we get things out each and every week. And if I was able to kind of back up the normal week-to-week Saint stuff with things like this, if this is something that you're interested in as a listener, I would love to hear that. And yeah, that would mean a lot to me if you did that. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into the show. And I would encourage you to check out the show notes as well, where we have Chris. We have his Instagram handle. We have his Twitter handle. I would encourage you to follow those because they are just entertaining. And if you're from America, which somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 to 40% of the listeners are, you will see some people that you will be familiar with come in and out of that feed from time to time. And I think it's quite fun. And one of the things I should say that we didn't actually talk about during the show was Chris doesn't live far from the Emirates, and he does this thing called Arsenal Fan TV, which is where he watches the Arsenal fans who wait for the Arsenal players after home games, and they try to get their autographs at the stoplights that are outside of his house. And basically, it made Arsenal home games fun again, because for a while there they were not. So I would encourage you just to check that out if you haven't done so already. But I'm taking up too much time here, so let's get into the interview. And once again, Chris, thank you so much for your time. I cannot thank you enough, but it means a lot, and thank you. All right, so here's the conversation. We'll talk to you after. I'd like to welcome to the Southampton Delivery Podcast, Chris Macchi. You may be familiar with his face and his voice, perhaps, from the Premier League in USA's Match Day Instagram story or a number of other outlets. But Chris, it's a pleasure to have you, and I think there's a lot about you that we don't know, and hopefully we get to get into that and a little bit more about what you're doing living in London as an American working on football.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm really excited, so thank you.
All right, man. No, my pleasure, and no problem. Thanks for being willing to do this. So just because, like, I'm familiar with you, and there's 30% of the audience is an American audience, and I'm fairly confident they're familiar with you. But those listeners who maybe live in the UK and maybe don't watch that Premier League in USA stuff or aren't familiar with your work, and you had to give them like a 3-word description of you, like what would that be for somebody just to get an idea of what you kind of do and are, just in a quick snippet?
Great question. I would say on the personal side, I'm a creative person. So creative is one of my 3 words. I'm an optimist. I choose to see the light in people and the light in the world. And then the 3rd one would be, I don't know, maybe consultant, in the sense that I think what I've found so far, both in career and personal wise, that I really like problem solving. So maybe consultant is or is not the right word, but what I really, really enjoy is figuring out where the opportunities are and trying to bring new life into opportunities that haven't really existed before. So those are my 3 words.
All right. A little bit of background. Like, I know you're an American living in London, but like, how'd you get there?
It's a great question. So I think maybe the place to start is I'm super, super lucky. I'm one of the many Americans, hopefully, and more over time, that actually gets to work in global football as a career. So I moved over to London about 18 months ago, and I basically, the easiest way to put it is I work with YouTubers on the agency side. So a lot of branded content, a lot of YouTube productions, that kind of stuff. But specifically, a lot of my work happens to be within the global football space. I keep saying global football because if I say American, they make fun of me over here. Or sorry, if I say soccer, they make fun of me over here. And if I say football, they don't know what I'm talking about over here and correct me anyways. So global football right now, at least, is my easy answer. But so I kind of work with YouTubers in the soccer space and in the global football space, and we create content. We do partnerships with brands, that kind of stuff. So I was based out in New York, still doing that work. I kind of got my foot in the door with Major League Soccer back a couple of years ago. So I've always been in the soccer space career-wise, but only the past 18 months or so have I been able to move out to London and kind of take ownership over our relationships out here. So that's the day job, I would say. And then on the weekends, as you kind of alluded to, I get to work pretty closely with the Premier League, specifically on the PL and USA channel, and travel around to different cities around the Premier League, and kind of take in the match day culture and try to highlight some of the unique things that we don't necessarily get to see during the 90 minutes of a match on NBC or whatever it may be. So yeah, I think it's a really, really fun project, and I'm super honored to be a part of it. And it obviously opens the doors to talk to more interesting people like you as well. So that's I was going to say 30-second version, but I don't know, it's probably 2 or 3 minutes at this point.
It's perfect. Don't worry about it. So, I mean, growing up, you grew up kind of in the United States, and, you know, me living in California, I know Southern California has kind of a big soccer culture, but for me, like American football, baseball, especially for me was like really prevalent growing up. And so I always find it kind of interesting to see kind of how people got into soccer or football here in the United States, just because for me, like I didn't actually start watching until I was an adult, and it was because my kids wanted to play and I got kind of into it. And now it's been kind of a 5 or 6 year period where I've been completely consumed by it. And so like for you growing up, it sounds like you've been kind of involved in football or soccer kind of the entire time. So like when did that happen, and kind of how did that happen living where you lived and moving around and stuff like that?
Yes, it's actually super interesting. And I've actually more recently thought a lot about it, and I still don't really understand how soccer came to be such a big part of my life. Like there's certainly a career side, which I think we can get into in a little bit. And there's a more linear story there. But in terms of like thinking back to like my first experiences or how I chose soccer, like I grew up moving around a bunch. I lived in 6 different states in about a span of 10 years, I would say maybe. And so my family was always kind of on the move, and sports were a really, really big part of my life. I've got 2 brothers, and they both were very athletic as well, still are very athletic, and my sister as well. So growing up, I played all sports. I kicked for the football team in high school. I played baseball as a kid, lacrosse even for a little bit. And for some reason, the one kind of continual thread was soccer from start to finish. I don't really know how. I mean, I guess it started with the beauty and the fun of youth soccer, but it ended up being kind of how I planted myself in different social circles whenever we would move. Is just soccer is how I met new friends instead of baseball or whatever it may be. So I still don't really understand how I chose soccer over the other sports. My dad was a big baseball guy and had a soccer background as well, but by no means was like, he was never our soccer coach or anything like that. And especially like when we look at the places that we lived, I was born in Virginia, but moved to Kentucky and moved to Iowa, Indianola, Iowa, which is just outside Des Moines, like a tiny town. And then we moved to Baltimore, Maryland from there, and then to Columbus, Ohio. And so when I look back, like I was really starting to identify myself as a soccer player way before I even moved to Maryland, which would have been in 4th grade, I think. So somehow in Indianola, Iowa, I was like really kind of doubling down on soccer as my sport. And I still don't really understand clearly how that became the sport. I'm 6'3". I wish I played basketball. But at the same time, like I really, I can't imagine my life without soccer. But it's strange that I don't really have a very clear, like, this is my decision. I'm choosing to quit baseball and play soccer full time now, blah, blah, blah. It was just always like, it was never a decision for me. It was just always part of who I was and how I made my friends every time we'd move.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds like, I mean, did your brothers and sisters, did they choose to go with soccer as well? Or did they play other sports? Or like, you know, was your dad kind of pushing you guys to do any of this stuff? Or was it just kind of, you know, what you did when you went to school and how you met people, kind of like you said?
Yeah, I think soccer was always the common thread between my brothers and I. My older brother, Tom, played soccer more specifically than like when I was younger, I was playing baseball and soccer and a couple others. He tried baseball, didn't really love it. So he was more focused on soccer before I ever was. And then my little brother, Eric, has definitely played soccer just as much as I did, but also like ran track and stuff that I never chose to do. So I don't know. I think like obviously soccer was kind of the center of that Venn diagram between us boys, but I think we were also we were playing video games all the time, and we were just kind of like running around and playing whatever you do as a kid, playing tag or catch or whatever. And so we would throw a baseball around, we'd throw a football around or whatnot. But in terms of playing organized sport, soccer just always ended up being the one middle ground for us boys.
Yeah, I think back to when my brother and I were younger. I have a brother who's 5 years younger than me, and we would go out, and baseball was our big thing, and we would just go out and like basically try to strike each other out. And then it always turned into, if one of us got a hit, the next time they were up, they were just going to get hit with the ball. Like, and it was like, it turned into that, like the neighbors could have just set up shop in the front yards and just watch, because it was going to end in some sort of like Nolan Ryan, Robin Ventura style, like beat down in the front yard. But once we got to the age where we were like, you know, I was going to junior college, I was like, all right, we got to stop this. Like, this is getting, 1 year bigger than me now. 2, like, this is just going to end poorly. So, yeah, I don't know.
Amazing. I think maybe that could have ended up being kind of a contributing factor, is that soccer was, Yeah, maybe I didn't trust my brothers enough to play baseball as in depth with them. I think we definitely would have gotten to that beating the batter a lot earlier, maybe in the game.
I mean, moving around so much and things like that. Like one of the things that I remember most vividly about my childhood is going down to games in Dodger Stadium with my dad. And I'm not a Dodger fan, but it's no fault of my dad, who tried forever to get me to be a Dodger fan. But my brother's a Red Sox fan and I'm a Houston Astros fan. But I have kind of vivid memories of going down to Dodger Stadium and seeing like just great, fantastic players play. Like we were at games when the Dodgers went 5 years in a row where they had the Rookie of the Year on their team. And like I remember those guys, and that's kind of like iconic in my childhood. But you moving around, did you gravitate towards a professional team that you were able to see, or do you have like a favorite player from those times growing up that really like sticks in your head and like, you know, that you just think about if I say like, you know, childhood and professional football, and who do you think of?
Yeah, so I think I'll split it in between basically the era before I moved to Columbus and then the era after I moved to Columbus. Mm-hmm. When I moved to Columbus, I was all in on the Columbus Crew, still am all in on the Columbus Crew. Try to keep up, try to watch the games as much as I possibly can, even though I'm now 4 to 5 hours ahead. And like the Crew is really the first club that I ever truly like loved and tried to see religiously and tried to keep up, and am still trying to do so as well. But the time before that, I was obviously, and still today, I'm a very big Premier League fan, but the time before that, I think is where I really started to establish myself as a big fan of watching soccer. Albeit it sounds like ancient history at this time. Like Fox Soccer Channel is just much more difficult to watch it. So my greatest memories, I think, from a club and from a fan point of view, for some reason I was drawn to Arsenal back in the day. I mean, Thierry, I was watching Thierry on TV. It was kind of before the Emirates, so it was this mystique of Highbury, and they were a great team and whatnot. My little brother somehow got drawn to Chelsea. My older brother seemed to enjoy Arsenal and Man United and whatnot. Just, I think it was more a function of being exposed to kind of certain teams and certain games on Fox Soccer Channel versus the exposure that we get with NBC these days, where you can kind of be a fan of whoever you want and have access to all the games. So yeah, I think growing up, certainly Arsenal was the team that I seemed to be drawn to the most. And Thierry was a big part of that, but hands down, the athlete that I've idolized, and still I think one of the few people that if I met in person, I would be shocked and I wouldn't really know what to say, is David Beckham. That dude had a massive impact on me as a kid growing up, and especially when he chose to come over to MLS and kind of invest in the American game. That is something that like will always kind of go hand in hand with my soccer story growing up. So there are club stories here and there, but nothing super like truly dedicated to with in terms of an affinity, aside from just a massive fan of Beck's growing up.
Yeah. There was a lot of stuff that went on with the Columbus Crew. The show has a couple of listeners that live in the Columbus area, and like where I live, I don't have like a hometown team, because I'm kind of like I'm 4.5 hours from San Francisco, and I'm about 3.5 hours from LA. I didn't grow up going to the stadium every week or anything like that. It was like a once a summer or twice a summer kind of thing. But like when you see like a city in an area, and then really like the larger kind of MLS just kind of landscape, everybody come together to support that team, you really see kind of what some of these teams and things mean to people. But when you talk about Beckham coming over, that seems to be a big turning point for the league, and it seems like MLS has kind of stopped and started a couple of times in terms of really getting people interested in getting viewers to kind of tune in consistently across the country. And actually, I find it a little bit easier to watch the Premier League than I do MLS, and that wasn't even the case really when I started watching football to begin with.
Yeah, it's a weird one. I think especially being over here, explaining the American fan experience as much as I can. Like, it's way easier to watch Premier League matches back home in the US than it is here. Like, there are a lot of traditional TV blackouts and whatnot that have been in place forever, and I think are really good in terms of encouraging people to continue to go to stadiums and support their team, whether they're in the Premier League or in the 4th division. So that stuff I think has really good heart behind it, but there's something special. And I think you hear it every time someone from here goes over to the US on holiday or whatever it may be. And they're like, wow, like I just sat and watched Premier League. I watched every single match on a Saturday morning and then had the rest of my day and blah, blah, blah. Like, there's still something really magical about the opportunity and access that we have right now to the Premier League back home. And I think I hope that the media world continues to see all access as the standard instead of continue to try to put things behind specific paywalls and all that kind of stuff. Because there's no question that the access that we have through NBC Sports and through the work that the Premier League's doing across the U.S. And the clubs especially, there's no question that is building bridges with fans that we never would have had access to even 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Yeah. Like you mentioned before, the Fox Soccer Channel seems like a very, very long time ago, and it has been. And we talked a little bit about you. We talked a little bit about kind of your childhood growing up. Maybe I'm missing things in there, but like I looked up your LinkedIn account. Sorry.
No, go for it.
Yeah, you didn't have a Wikipedia page that I could glean much from, so I had to go the more traditional route, I guess. But like, I think you studied biology,
Yeah.
And then now you're working on media. So I have questions about that because that seems like a slightly weird transition. But like, you also mentioned that you went to a D3 school, and maybe people that are in the UK won't understand that. That's like Division 3, right? So it's just a slightly smaller school than maybe something like Ohio State or Michigan, or probably much smaller than that. But like, did you play soccer or football while you were there? Was that part of the reason that you went to the D3 school, or like what drew you to the university or the college that you chose?
So I went to a school called Arcadia University. It's a small, as you said, it's a small school outside Philly. And to be totally honest, like I was never a good enough soccer player to actually make that much of a difference on a college team. So I was not recruited. I was not planning on really playing college soccer, but for sure it was a dream of mine to be connected to the soccer world in any way, shape, or form as a college student. I was still, all through high school, I was a soccer kid. Like that's kind of how I identified myself. That's certainly how my friendship and my friend group was kind of composed. So soccer was not supposed to be really a big driving force in my college experience. I ended up choosing Arcadia because it's frankly where my dad worked. It was more out of convenience, and it was a good enough school, and had some really redeeming qualities, like had a really big study abroad program. So I wasn't by any means forced into it. It was for sure like it's interesting. And frankly, like I would just love to be able to spend more time with my pops. He was always kind of away working. He would travel quite a bit during the week as we were growing up. So I really only got to see him a ton on the weekends, and then he'd be out during the middle of the week traveling across the U.S. So the opportunity to go somewhere where I actually got to spend time with my dad was the biggest driving force in kind of choosing Arcadia. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking like, I might not be able to walk on and make this team, but I can for sure find a way to wiggle myself in as a team manager or something like that. And then so I didn't do anything my freshman year, just kind of like I tried to watch the team, tried to understand more about the program and whatnot. And then there was a coaching change going into sophomore year. And I made it very clear. I met the guy kind of when he was first moving onto campus and kind of getting his feet set, and said, hey, man, like I'm not going to be your answer for like a new number 10 on this team or anything like that. But if there's anything I can do from a managerial role, from a team manager, or someone coming off the bench, or just a practice guy, like I'm just dying to get back involved with soccer in any way, shape, or form. And luckily he welcomed me, and more specifically the guys on the team had welcomed me, and he kind of basically gave me an opportunity. Said, yeah, like come through our spring season, have kind of a hybrid role between getting involved in practice and helping out with team manager duties and all that kind of stuff. And then that kind of led to more of a spot on the roster versus having to do some of the administrative stuff. So it was an amazing opportunity. It was something that made up a massive part of my years 2, 3, and 4 at school. And I can't really imagine my college experience without having the teammate camaraderie and whatnot through playing. But by no means was I ever a standout player. And kind of my college experience was not based on being recruited or anything like that. I think it was just about loving soccer so much and knowing that I wanted to be involved and doing whatever it took to make sure that I was providing value to the team so I could continue to stay involved.
I mean, just that. I mean, I guess the self-awareness at a college age is not always there. That seems like maybe a different approach to kind of becoming involved. And it's almost like, you were willing to do some of the things that maybe other players who maybe, like you said, might even be better than you they were either going to be on the team or they weren't. They weren't willing to do kind of those other things. And I think that just talk about you being a problem solver and things like that and working things out. Like, I think that probably lends itself to the type of work that you do now, just willing to think about things in a slightly different fashion. That's much different than a lot of people that I grew up with who were really good athletes who never got to play after high school because they had their mind set on one thing and that was it. So I mean, let's like look at how you went from biology to media. Was media always like something you were interested in? I mean, I was going to college and university before like you could even really take a video on your cell phone. So like it's maybe a little bit different, but I don't know for you, like, were you always interested in doing that type of stuff, or was that something that came later, maybe after you graduated?
Yeah, I think there was, it's weird to look back and say there was actually a light bulb moment, because I don't know that I've had very many of those, but, and I hope that the listeners at some point in their life get the opportunity. I'm sure they will all have an opportunity to have a light bulb moment. But there was certainly a light bulb moment for me, and it was the day after I graduated college. I graduated in 2012, so the new media world, the digital and social world, was not really that big. Like, Facebook was a thing. I don't think Instagram was a thing. I didn't have a smartphone until after I graduated college. So like my college experience was not really predicated on social. I was on Twitter and that kind of stuff, but I didn't really understand the power of it. But there was a light bulb moment the day after I graduated where it was like kind of this realization of like, okay, cool. I punched my ticket. I did what I had to do. I don't have to go to med school anymore. So my goal in life was to be a cardiologist. I wanted to be a doctor. I was born with a heart, not malformation or anything like that. Thankfully, it never really affected the way that I grew up or limited my abilities, thankfully. But I had like yearly check-ins with cardiologists, and my entire life, those guys were my heroes. It's just like, wow, you guys are your superheroes in the flesh, and the work you get to do is amazing. So growing up, it was always, I want to be a cardiologist. I've got this really cool life story as to how it's led. So it kind of felt like self-selecting. So biology as a major was what I always planned on doing. And Arcadia had a really good physical therapy school. So a couple years into my college experience, when I realized, like, actually, maybe I'm, first off, not smart enough to be a cardiologist, and maybe I just don't have enough gas in the tank to do another, like, 7 years of med school and then residency and all that stuff. I was thinking physical therapy would be really, really cool. So I started to switch my focus to physical therapy throughout school. But again, that light bulb moment, the day after I graduated, when I was still kind of waffling about, do I want to go to PT school? Do I want to, take a year off, whatever? That light bulb moment for me ultimately was, I actually don't have to do any of this. Like, what do I like to do? Now that I have a college degree, thankfully, I'm very, very lucky to have that. It was never, a given or anything like that. But what do I want to do versus what have I told myself that I have to do and have to spend my life doing? And that moment was a crucible moment for me. It was very just like, it was eye-opening. And the only thing that I really, really loved doing was soccer. And at this point still, mind you, I've grown up playing my entire life. I've grown up with an MLS team in my hometown for those formative years. Went to college, still didn't realize that people worked in soccer. I just had no idea that that there was anything outside of, like, if you're not going to be a professional athlete, like, I knew that there was like the kit man. And then, like, honestly, if I still think today, like, my dream job would be to be a kit man. I just think it's an amazing opportunity to kind of work very closely with the athletes that we all love and adore. You get to be a part of the team. You don't necessarily have the pressure of performing, because I never was good enough of a soccer player to be able to deal with that pressure anyways. And it was kind of this happy medium of like, hey, you get to work in professional sports, you get to travel, do all these cool things, and also get really close to the athletes and get to kind of invest in their lives and help solve their problems. That would be really cool. So all this to say, and I think that kind of was maybe in the back of my mind when I was pursuing that team manager role in college too. It's just like, I think, no one knows really what my career was going to pan out to be, but I thought, if I don't like med school, maybe I could try to be a kit man or something like that. But still graduated soccer without any idea that team management or like ticket sales or even like groundskeeping, anything like that. Like, there's so many roles within the game that we all love that people, I think, at least I didn't have any concept of growing up. So my entire goal in life, I think, has now kind of shifted to making it more clear for kids growing up in the States that there are more opportunities out there to work in the game that you love, whether it's at a grassroots level or a professional level, even if your calling is to not play professionally. Because it's a realization that I probably would have saved a lot of time and effort if I had earlier. But thankfully, I didn't. I think having a biology background taught me a lot. And it's kind of paved the way for me to realize that certain things you just have to kind of push through, whether you like it or not. And as long as you can punch your ticket, you can open up the doors to some other things with hard work and whatnot. So that's a very roundabout story. But eventually, I guess maybe the way to summarize it is I graduated college. The next day, I realized I didn't have to be a doctor like I had originally planned, and was then able to shift my entire focus to working in soccer and problem solving as to how I was going to do that.
Me growing up, like my goal was always to become a teacher. And in my mind, it was anything other than that would have been a failure, and that's how I would have seen it. And I thought that's how my parents would have seen it. Although now being older, I think they would have been kind of more understanding with whatever I wanted to do. But I think there's like this kind of tough kind of conversation, at least, that I think people have maybe internally, or maybe they just feel this pressure from their parents. Like, were your parents supportive when you've gone through 4 years of university, you've come out with a biology degree with kind of this stated goal of becoming a cardiologist or becoming a physical therapist or something like that? And then, when you have that conversation with them, like, hey, I'm actually going to go in this direction. Were they supportive, or was there a little bit of a hesitancy on their part? And like, how did you deal with that? And sorry, this isn't in the original show notes, but now I'm kind of, diving in here.
No, it's a great question. I think because like ultimately that was a point in my life where everything changed, right? That realization of, okay, I don't want to be a doctor anymore. So now what do I do? Thankfully, and I don't know that I was going to be cognizant of this at that time anyway. I didn't really know what my parents would say, but they were completely on board and behind it. I think they knew that, of course, I had this dream of being a doctor, but really what my mom would tell me growing up is do your best and have fun. She was more concerned about not necessarily being a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, but finding whatever it is that motivates you and drives you and that you love, and chasing after that with reckless abandon. My dad, neither of my parents actually went to college fully. Like, they didn't do a 4-year school. So they were happy that all of us kids have now gone through 4-year colleges, and we're very, very lucky to have gotten degrees, especially based on like my dad being able to work at a school and kind of helping out on that financial front. That was massive for us. But career wise, they never pushed us to be certain things. And I think growing up, I maybe felt like I didn't want to disappoint them, and being a doctor is something that I knew that they would be proud of just based on what society says. But when I look at like my dad's career, he loves what he does. I'm sure there are bad days and whatnot, but he's a facilities manager. He's now kind of the vice president at the school that I went to. He's found a lot of success in that space. And I feel really, really lucky to have learned from him that it's not always going to be about being a doctor or a lawyer or whatever society says. If you find what it is that you're good at and what you love, then that is the most important thing, because you'll get way more out of a career, and the world will get way more out of you if you're doing something that you're passionate about. Yeah. So thankfully, my parents were totally on board with kind of that change of heart. And I think they would have been on board at any point in time, whether I had that change of heart 2 years into school or 5 years afterwards. I'm really, really lucky to have their support in that space.
It's one of those things that like I struggle with, because I'm a teacher and I want kids to go do, be successful. That's what I want for my students. That's why I'm there, because I teach at the school that I went to. I grew up in the town that I live in now. And so like, I'm a part of that, but like those kids come through and generally they are being pushed by, whether it's the counselors or their parents or whatever, just to go to college and have some kind of 9-to-5 job. And that's kind of still what they are that's what they see as successful. So it's always kind of weird to kind of go like, actually, you can do whatever it is you want. You're going to have to work really hard, and there will be setbacks, and you'll get your dream job at some point maybe. And even then you will have bad days. It will feel like work sometimes, but you overall, like you said, will be much happier, and the people around you will benefit much more if you were doing something that you are truly passionate about, rather than, there are always teachers who have been checked out for 10 years and they're still around, and it's clear that the passion's gone, and nobody benefits from that. So yeah, I think that's a really kind of powerful message, that like, even I, as a 33-year-old kind of I look at my kids and go like, what am I encouraging them to do? Am I doing this the right way? Or am I somehow limiting their choices, their passion for something, which is part of the reason that we started watching football in the first place, was because my son's like, I don't like baseball anymore. I want to play soccer. And I'm like, let's go. And now he's moved on. He's playing volleyball now. So anyway, if he could have some of your height, that would be great. Cause my wife and I are, my wife's 5'4", I'm 5'7". He's not blessed with that. So he better learn how to serve or something.
He's going to be great. I can already feel it.
It's a lot of fun to watch him. It's also really, really weird to watch him try to block a ball. It's like, what are you doing in the front row? But anyway,
that's all right.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's take a kind of a walk, and I may be missing a couple of steps here, but you went from college, and then you said you kind of transitioned at some point into Kick, where you were an intern. Like, how did that happen?
So that, I think, is still the thing. Like, that is out of all of this, that's the magic in this, and I still don't really understand, like, step by step how it really happened. So here's I'll put it this way. Here's what happened, and then we can talk about maybe the mystery that surrounds it. So I graduated college, knew that I loved soccer, knew that I didn't want to be a doctor anymore, and knew that I wanted to somehow find my way into soccer. And what I was learning at this point was that I really, really enjoyed social media, specifically because it allowed me to connect with my friends back home that I was not at college with. So I would say probably 80% of my high school class all went to Ohio State because we were in a suburb of Columbus, and I did not. So I was far away from home. All my friends were together having a great time, and I was not taking part in that experience. But thanks to Facebook and Twitter, I was still able to kind of stay connected and keep in touch with those guys. So I knew pretty early on, this was probably 2012, pretty early on, that social was a big deal for me. So I'm sure it was a big deal for other people. And around the same time that I was graduating college, Kick TV was becoming a big thing. They had just launched maybe a couple months before I graduated. And I would say, I think I just got like maybe hyper targeted by an ad. But I was pretty early on in terms of like a fan for Kick. I was there as a fan pretty early doors. So I graduated college in 2012. I worked for a full year, and then about probably January of 2013. So this is now 9 months after graduating college. Kick was becoming a little bit bigger, and then on Twitter I'd seen that they were sending off their intern. They tweeted out kind of like, you know, hey, thanks to our old intern. They were at the bar, so it was a photo of them kind of clinging drinks. Best of luck in the future, and we hope to, you know, follow along with what you get up to. So I tweeted back at them. I was sitting on my couch at the same house that I was living in when I was at college, sitting on my couch, and said, hey, let me know if you guys need someone to pick up from where she left off. And I don't know if it was a couple minutes or maybe half an hour later, they said, send us your best Vine as to why we should pick you. And this Vine being the 6-second clip app that is no longer, but maybe coming back, who knows. But so I was sitting there on my couch. I just had my family, basically around Christmas, had just gotten a golden retriever puppy. So I was sitting there with Bear, and I was watching a game. It was some like CONCACAF U20 something. It was somehow on TV or stream or something like that. So I make this Vine, and I'll send you the links. It's still out there. Make this Vine for them and say, hey guys, my name is Chris. I can write. I love Kick TV, and this is my puppy Bear. And so the last 2 seconds was me kind of turning the camera to show this golden retriever puppy. And that was it. But I didn't hear anything back about it. Like, cool, like, let's keep in touch or anything like that. I was like, all right, well, at least I shot my shot. Like, they're going with someone else. Kick TV, is based in New York. I don't live in New York. So feasibly, it's pretty hard for me to get up there, even though I'm in Philly, blah, blah, blah. I just convinced myself, like, I wasn't too invested in it. I didn't actually think it was going to happen in the first place. And I was just glad that they, frankly, had reached back out to show that there were humans on the other side. So a couple weeks later, maybe it might have been like 2 months later, I got a random email from this guy named Will McDonough, he's now the head of brand for Kick, or Copa 90 US, as it's now known. But I got an email from Will, and I'm sure I still have it in my inbox, that said, hey, if you're the Vine guy, no, the subject was, are you the Vine guy, ? And then the kind of the body of the message was, if so, we should chat, let me know. And so I emailed back like immediately, holy shit, like maybe this is like a big break that everyone's been talking about in careers. So I messaged back like immediately, yes, like that's me. Would love to chat. Like, let me know the time, place, whatever. So that turned into a phone call, which later turned into an in-person meeting at the Kick office, which is actually part of, still kind of part of MLS. But at the time, we were based in MLS headquarters in New York.
Okay.
So it was me going out for an in-person interview in MLS HQ, which is like, I couldn't believe I was there in the first place. It was a dream come true. And they said, yeah, I mean, like, can you start in May? So it all kind of came out of nowhere. But what I still don't know is how Will got my email address from Vine or Twitter. I don't think it was on Twitter. Maybe it was. But I still remember being like very mystified as to how he got my email address. So I don't think it would have been associated with my Twitter account because that's the easy answer.
Yeah.
But there's still, like, when I look back on it, there's still not really, and I've talked to Will about this many times, we still don't really know where he got the email address from, but thankfully it's an email address that was correct and got to where it needed to get to.
I mean, did he send a lot of those emails? Like, are you the Vine guy? Like, if so, we should talk. Like, how many people just didn't respond or like, nope, it's not me? Like, you know, did you ever gotten that information out of him?
No, that's a great question. I should ask him. I know that, like, so since after I finished my internship at Kick, I was lucky enough to stay on full-time at MLS, but it was also like the next phase was finding the intern that would take my place and all that stuff. And that ended up being a more traditional search, talking to people at NYU and whatnot. But I think ultimately, and maybe this is like the life lesson that I've subscribed to, is like me sending that Vine is what set me apart. If I sent my resume, it wouldn't have been good enough. There was no soccer outside of like college soccer, but it wasn't really, there was no social, there's nothing there that would make me stand out from any other person. What it was ultimately was an effort that said, hey, I'm willing to do something creative and different to catch your eye. And I think in today's world, it's never been easier to send those messages or contact someone on Instagram or send a DM or whatever. And there are a lot of these kind of instances in my life where I've gotten to a point maybe further along in my career based off of the technology that has allowed that to happen today. So maybe the life story there is like, use the tools at your disposal. If you're someone coming up trying to work in soccer or trying to work in, I don't know, you want to be a librarian, whatever it may be, like whatever your chosen goal is, figure out the creative solution that other people are not doing. Just assume that everyone else is going to send their resume. So what are you doing on top of that to extend a personal relationship or extend a kind of a unique fact about yourself or make yourself stand out? Because there's no way in hell I'd be where I am today, specifically working in soccer, if it weren't for that Vine 5 years ago.
I mean, how nervous were you when you sent that Vine in? Like, was there doubt in your head? Like, this definitely isn't good enough, or they're not even going to look at this, or, you know, people, you know, now whenever I put out an episode, like there is this little thing in the back of my head. Whenever I put out an Instagram image, there's always something in the back of my head that goes like, somebody is going to like make fun of me, hate on this, you know, whatever. Was there any of that doubt in your head at that point?
Strangely, I don't think I had that much. Like, I suffer from the same thing. I don't know if we call it social media anxiety or whatever it is, but there's certainly a lot of second guessing in today's world. And I don't think I had any of that back then. I think it was more of just like, I don't think this is going to turn into anything. So it's a win-win, basically. There is no lose situation. Like, the lose situation is that they don't get back and they don't care about it. And like, I'm still in the same spot that I am now. So it was only a win in my eyes. Of course, I could have represented myself poorly in that. And there was, you know, I had to make sure that I was doing my best to show my abilities and stuff. But you look back at that Vine and be like, it's super cringy, but I'm also super proud of it because I didn't make it more than it had to be either. It was just like, be genuine and authentic, and share a part of your life that people don't see or might care about or whatever, but ultimately do what it takes to put yourself out there. Because you never know who's going to mop that up.
Yeah.
They could have very well looked at it and be like, well, this is the worst Vine I've ever seen. In which case, I probably wouldn't have been a good fit there anyways. And so it would have been a blessing that they chose to go to a different direction.
Yeah.
But thankfully, it just kind of happened. I knew ultimately what the tone and voice of Kick TV was. I had been a big fan to that point, so it wasn't a blind shot on my end. But I kind of knew what I was getting into, and sure, maybe my hopes were high, but at the same time, I had no expectations. So I wasn't really going to be heartbroken if they didn't get back. It was just, I left space for myself to be amazed when the email did come through.
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing, is the fact that you were a fan and you kind of understood like the tone that they were trying to set and going for. And you realized like that had some sort of connection and match kind of with you, you know? And so that because you are obviously a fan, so that you're kind of drawn to that. And so that when you fire off that vine, there's a fit there, and maybe it's somewhat natural, but also there's a little bit of a conscious decision probably to make sure that you're fitting with that. And I think that's an important thing that some people sometimes miss, is that they want to write, they want to do this, they want to do that. So they're just firing off, you know, things to people all over the place, but they're not taking time to kind of understand the culture of the place that they're kind of going with. And just as like, you know, I've said this before, but like, I'm not a super creative kind of person. I had a pretty linear, like I became a teacher as fast as possible. And now kind of looking back at that stuff, it's listening to people who are entrepreneurs and kind of filmmakers and things like that. Like that's one of the things that they really look for, is they look for things that they drive with and they fit with, and that the tone is right. And that, because if it's the right job, like we said this before, if it's the right kind of fit, everybody benefits from that. But you went from Kick TV to MLS, and you worked on a number of projects there. What was that like? I don't know, graduating, I guess, from intern to full-time employee of you know, the biggest soccer football organization in the United States?
I think it's still probably, and may always be, the proudest moment of my career. I think that was kind of I hate to say that like I completed it at that point, but like that was the holy crap, like I can do this. Holy crap, there is opportunity to work in this space, when, you know, just 9 months ago, I didn't think that anyone else was able to work in soccer. Holy crap, there is a way for me to pursue my dream. And I just never knew it existed. Thankfully, I'm able to try to pursue this now. I think it was the most redeeming feeling I've ever had. But also was like, okay, a lot of people went to bat for me. And now I've really got to go to work and make sure that they are not disappointed, and prove that I belong in this space. I still, even today, like I look at my ability to work in soccer as ultimately a privilege more than anything. There are a lot of people who are a lot smarter than I am, that are probably a lot better at my job than I am, and would kill to work in soccer. And for whatever reason, they just haven't had the same path as I have. And I hope that somehow I'm able to help, whether it's now or 20 years from now, help develop more opportunity for those people. But I think ultimately that was the greatest feeling in the world. There's a lot that kind of went into it. First off, I never would have been able to move to New York if my girlfriend wasn't already living in New York. She went from the school that we met at Arcadia. She then did 2 more years at Columbia University, so she was already living up there. There's no way I would have been able to sustain myself in New York on an intern salary if she wasn't already up there and let me basically crash in her apartment. She didn't ask her roommates, and like it totally was not like super cool. But it was also like a story in doing whatever you had to do to pursue this dream. And then at the same time, when my internship was finishing up at Kick, there was no direct full-time opportunity there. I made it very clear that, like, guys, my dream is to work in MLS, but like I want to stay in, I want to work in sport. And so I had a couple other interviews and opportunities. And then ultimately that kind of opened the chance for some of my mentors and my bosses at Kick to go up the ladder and say, look, Chris has an opportunity elsewhere. He's leaving next week. If we aren't able to somehow create a position for him. And I still like feel so thankful for this, but like a couple people kind of went into offices higher up the food chain and said, hey, we really need this guy to stay around. And I owe kind of everything to them. So Nelson Castro, Will McDonough are 2 guys and Jimmy Conrad was the face of Kick at the time. Those 3 guys kind of came together and said, look, Chris really should be a part of what we're building. And thankfully it kind of worked. So yeah, it was crazy. They created an opportunity for me to stay on full time at MLS as part of the MLS Plus team, which was kind of like in hindsight, I don't think it still exists under that name, but we were creating video pieces that were designed to reach beyond the core audience. So I think my metric for success still to this day is like, am I creating a piece of video that my mom's going to find on Yahoo and send to me because she thinks it's a cute soccer video that she didn't realize that I actually made? And so that was very much the goal of MLS Plus, is like, how do we make stuff about MLS and our athletes and our players that reach beyond the core audience? And so stuff like Mike McGee's Day Off, MLS Insider was a like kind of in-depth storytelling show that was on NBC Sports at the time. Mm-hmm. And then a couple other one-off projects that were more geared towards kind of telling culture stories instead of just, this team won 2-0. Will they win 3-0 this time?
Right. Yeah, they train a lot. Soccer players run a lot. Like, they run 10K every 90 minutes. It's like, yeah, okay. Yeah. Like, cool. I enjoy that because I'm like, well, that's, but not everybody does. And so I just think like that's something growing up as a baseball fan that just, I didn't even realize that existed. Like the fact that there were people that were doing that job somewhere else, like trying to draw more people in, not like in a cringe kind of sort of way. Like, it's like you want to make this relevant. You want to make this and show that there is a human side, because ultimately I think that's what people want. They want to know kind of the human side of the story. And you see like we have a lot more in common with maybe a professional footballer than we really realize, even though, there are a lot of things on the surface that are much, much different. But, I think that's maybe one way that social media has really maybe closed that gap a little bit. Danny Ings goes home and the first thing he does is play with his dogs. Like, how many people in the world do that? And, Danny Ings is just like us. And now, we're all in love with him and all that, even though we were going to be in love with him as Southampton fans anyway, because, he's a local guy and all that stuff. But, like, I'll be really honest that I'm never, ever leaving my job. Like the chances of me walking away from the career that I have right now to do anything else or even do this job somewhere else is, I would say, 0. Maybe there's a 5% chance, just because I don't think I can. I'm not a risk taker. You at some point left MLS. Like, what was that like? You thought you kind of made it, I guess. Like, you had achieved kind of what you thought was maybe the ceiling, and then at some point you realize, like, I can go elsewhere and do more stuff. Like, what was that decision like when you chose to leave MLS and pursue a career elsewhere?
Yeah, it was actually really interesting. So what happened was Copa 90 bought Kick TV, or acquired Kick TV. Mm-hmm. So Kick TV was becoming Copa 90 US. I think ultimately, like, when we were at Kick, we saw Copa 90 as the competitor, very much so. Like, it was head to head. We were bigger than them. We had this underdog attitude for sure, because we were American and because the prevailing opinion is that Americans don't know anything about soccer and all that kind of stuff. But we were led by Jimmy, and Jimmy played in the World Cup and all that kind of stuff. So we were doing our best to kind of push back on that notion that Americans were naive and didn't know anything about the game. So Copa comes in and acquires Kick, and things didn't really change at that point. I was still very much full-time at MLS, focusing on other projects, even though I was still sitting with the Kick guys, like, in the same physical space. I was just focusing on other stuff. But what it ultimately the opportunity that arose was a different company called Whistle Sports came in and said, "Hey, we are really interested in building something just like Kick was building. Do any of you guys want to come kind of build it from scratch again?" And so there are 4 of us that decided, yeah, let's give that a shot. I think it's at this point too, some of us were working on the MLS stuff instead of Kick stuff specifically. Uh-huh. And Kick always just had a much more youthful tone. MLS, I'd absolutely loved, and I would be lucky to get to work there again, like, for sure. It's a labor of love, and I felt super fortunate. But at the same time, in the back of my mind was, it'd be fun to try to start the magical days of early Kick TV again, and kind of get to respin it and refocus on the U.S. audience and whatnot. So we all, the 4 of us, went to Whistle as a team. We started something called the FC, which is basically our version of Kick. And what we quickly found is that the industry was very different. Kick and Copa kind of came out of a place where there was a void for this independent soccer voice, and kind of indifferent, this confident voice that didn't have to be reporting on team news and all that stuff. It was more focused on fan experience and FIFA content and just like more fun stuff instead of the day in, day out doldrums of news headlines and stuff that we get with the rest of the world's kind of coverage on soccer. So what we found is that the FC was a lot harder to get caught up to speed on, just because the industry had changed. There were more like individual YouTubers, and personality is a really big thing instead of just being a refreshing take on soccer news. And so, long story short, the FC ended up getting kind of pushed to the side as a result, but it gave me the chance to do was kind of take ownership over the relationships Whistle had with a lot of the big soccer YouTubers across the world. And I was in New York at this time, but that was kind of what laid the foundation for my move out to the UK, was having these relationships with YouTubers like BF2 and Spencer FC and Calfreezy, and a handful of other people that I don't mean to not list right now, but the list would go on.
Right.
But ultimately, it meant that I get to kind of work in a talent management role, which was something really exciting. But the biggest thing for me was trying to find new ways to help drive opportunity for these guys. They're all starting small businesses. Whether we want to look at YouTubers like that or not, these guys are all really, really smart businessmen. Mm-hmm. And we're creating opportunity for themselves, just like the rest of us would want to create opportunity, as a musician or anything like that. They were just also building an industry at the same time. So that is kind of getting more caught up to speed as to where I am today. But the opportunity to move on from MLS, thankfully, was not me on my own, which I think I would have said no if it wasn't without the group that I was able to come over with.
I guess that decision to move to London, I don't know, you have a girlfriend, she is now over there with you, and I believe is your fiance.
Yes.
And congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
And there's a series of tough decisions in there. You made that move to Whistle at some point. You had the opportunity to move to London, which is a new country. You lived in kind of around big cities before, and you lived in New York, so I guess that helps. But what was that like when you landed in London and went like crap, this is where I live now? Like what was that kind of feeling like?
Honestly, it was the greatest feeling ever, because as a kid, and I think hopefully a lot of your listeners can maybe subscribe to this, but there's always some sort of fascination. If you grow up loving the beautiful game in America, there's some sort of fascination with living abroad, or having the chance to, watch it every single day as you've been watching it on TV. And the Premier League, as we all know, is unrivaled in terms of competition, and just top to bottom, it's a fun league to watch. And I think for me, when I first, my visa came through and then flying over, I was never scared of it. I was for sure not sure if it was going to work out. You never know how the reception is going to be of an American moving over or anything like that. But ultimately, it was a dream come true, whether I completely failed or not. It was just holy crap, I get to move to London and fulfill this dream of mine. So landing, for sure, there were times where it's just what am I doing? I'm far from New York. I still love New York. The opportunity that it gives someone who lives in that city, New York, is unparalleled, maybe aside from Tokyo. I can't claim to have been to every city on earth, though, so I won't go that far. But just I would say London does not really hold a candle to New York in the city point of view from my experience or from my opinion. But it's obviously kind of Mecca in terms of soccer fans and this fan culture. So there's never any hesitancy, but it was for sure an interesting time, because my girlfriend, we both lived together in New York. And then she had an opportunity to move to San Francisco with her work, and it was a good enough opportunity that there's no chance I was going to say no. What do you mean? We're living together in New York. That's going to make things more difficult. There was never any of that. It was that's amazing. Do it, and we'll figure it out. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So she moved to San Francisco, and that was a couple weeks before my London opportunity really started to materialize. So similarly, she knew me moving to London would hopefully be the next major step in my career of wanting to work in soccer, and she could not have been more supportive about it. It meant that there were now 8 hours between us instead of 5, and some more logistical issues obviously there, but we weren't living together in New York at the time. So it was never I'm going to go chase this dream and I hope to see you on the other side. We knew that we'd figure it out. We just didn't know how, when, or where. But I don't think at any point we kind of doubted the ability to make it work. Especially when we both had kind of dream come true opportunities on either side.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important for people to realize that sometimes, you and your fiance have been together for a long time, but the path to kind of getting to where you are now isn't necessarily a linear one or a straightforward one. There are, it doesn't have to be kind of lockstep and kind of maybe how our parents did or how my parents did it. It's in career and all of these other things I think are are important and they take you different places. And I think, like you said, like you guys had the commitment to, make it work. That's what it takes. And I'm sure, going from living in the same city to living one country away to living now overseas, like that's some serious strain on a relationship, and especially landing in new places, both developing, careers and things like that. Like I have to give you guys some credit for that, because that's super impressive.
Yeah, I think honestly, it sounds really harsh, but it was the greatest thing we ever could have done. Move that far away from each other, because it re-taught us what we really appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
And also re-taught us like that when we were in New York, we ultimately became lazy. We would just go home, watch TV, just kind of hang out or do our own thing. And we kind of took for granted some of the friendships that we had, and we never really cross-pollinated our friend groups. So when she moved to San Francisco, she obviously did her best to put down her roots and find new friendships out there, and did an amazing job. Has some really, I think, lifelong friends from her time in San Francisco. And then likewise, I made a really concerted effort to try to meet new people in London, not really knowing that she was going to move out here. That was never really part of the plan. But when we did kind of move back together, we knew that the very top of that list was we need to make sure that we're still saving space for us to do the things that we love, but also to make sure that we're investing into each other's friend groups, because it's what we ultimately kind of missed out on in New York. And looking back, it's the one thing that we really would have wished we did better in New York. So us moving apart gave us the space to kind of focus on those relationships, and then ultimately figure out what it is that's important between us, that later on in life we knew that we needed to make sure that we were focusing on.
Yeah, man, I can't even imagine what that does to a relationship, but also, now it sounds like, you're being much more intentional about how the relationship works and what it means to you. And I think that's something that is super important. And like, I follow you on Instagram, obviously, and I watch your Instagram story, and like, she's along with you at some of these other things. Like, you guys were at the Wembley Cup, I think last weekend, and doing these other things. And you also do things that like she's into. And like, it's kind of weird to see that happen, because you guys are making kind of your life work. And yeah, I think it's great. So anyway, you mentioned that you have kind of been involved with a number of other people and YouTube footballers and things like that. And like the list is pretty long, but like, if I had to ask you to like kind of pick out maybe one or two of the projects that you have been involved with that kind of you're like, I'm sure you're proud of a lot of them, but like that you are super proud of, that like stick out in your mind as being something that kind of represents the work that you do, and then ultimately the impact you would like to have. Like, do you have kind of one or two of those things that kind of stand out to you?
It's a great question. Yes. So I think the biggest project that I've had the pleasure of working on so far was one that we just released ahead of the World Cup. It was with the F2, who are the largest YouTubers in the football space. So bigger than Real Madrid, bigger than FIFA, bigger than Barcelona. The F2 are two guys that have, a massive social following, mm-hmm. but they've become very, very good friends of mine through the work that I get to do. But starting probably this time last year, we were on the road for probably 4 months straight, filming an 8-episode series for YouTube. It was called YouTube Red at the time. It's now YouTube Premium, but it's basically like make a Netflix show, but for YouTube with YouTubers. So we went to 8 different countries, telling soccer stories and exploring kind of soccer culture around the world. So we went to Japan and Thailand, Mexico, France, the US. I'm trying to think of what else I'm missing. Iceland. I don't even know. That's probably 7. And then Argentina. Yeah. I think that's all 8. And that was an experience that I will never forget. Like that, it allowed me the opportunity to travel around the world and kind of tell stories. And I got to help script a lot of it. But ultimately, it was just getting to see the impact that these guys have around the world. Like they're recognized not globally, and it's not just the F2. Like sure, they are right now. They're the biggest. Eventually, someone else will be bigger. That's the glory and the beauty of YouTube. But guys who are not the biggest on YouTube are massive celebrities in and of themselves, or have a amazing way of connecting with people and having audiences relate with them. So I think ultimately, that was kind of a microcosm, or maybe a macrocosm, for lack of a better term. It was a really big project that I kind of opened my eyes, but ultimately the everyday blessing is seeing these guys kind of create opportunity out of nowhere, create their own media companies, create their own followings, and then relate with people and hopefully make lives of their fans better or more entertaining on a day-to-day basis. So that is the most fulfilling work I could do right now, is try to be a part of those things that mean a lot to their fans.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll be honest that I'm probably not like the target demographic for a lot of the YouTube stuff. I think I'm slightly too old, but like I watch those guys. Like I watch the videos because I find them not just, to be good at football, but I think the stories that they tell are kind of inspiring, and kind of I'm at a place where I don't watch a lot of like standard kind of TV. Like YouTube is kind of what my kids watch, and it's what I watch. And if I have to watch one more like shot of the Jaegers with my daughter, like I might actually hurt someone. But like it's been the stories that are out there that the F2 guys and some of the other people have been able to tell, they're inspiring. And like I wonder, like as you're going through that, like as this project is kind of being built, and like is there doubt in your mind, like can this work, or are you worried about failure at that point, or was it just something that you guys all felt it was like, this is important, we need to do this, we have to do this? Like how does that work?
I think, and especially this is something that I struggle with a lot with the Premier League and USA stuff, is the hardest part is knowing that you'll never be able to tell the entire story. So there's always a talking point, especially with the PL and USA stuff, where we try to keep it consumable. Like if I see an Instagram story that's longer than 15 segments, I'm probably not watching it. It's just the reality of like media consumption and my preferences. I want it to be shorter and snackable. But based on that, it means you can't tell everything about the Southampton fan experience. You can't tell everyone why the Everton-Liverpool derby is a big deal, or where it started, or how it got to where it is today. But likewise, when you're going to Japan to talk about Japanese football culture, you know that you're only going to be able to scratch the surface. And there's definitely a frustration in, even if it's a massive success, knowing that there are notes and really important personal stories out there that we're essentially ignoring or not even knowing about. And I think for me, ultimately, that's the most exciting part, knowing that you can only scratch the surface on the story whenever you're trying to make the effort to tell it. So I think when I look at the next couple months with the Premier League, like we've done a lot of the 20 clubs so far. So probably by the time March comes around, we've been to every single club. So does that mean we're going to stop doing stories? Hopefully not. I think it means that we get to go back to some of these places and tell different stories, or tell maybe an away fan story. And I think ultimately it can be frustrating if you want to look at it that way, that like nothing will ever be good enough. But at the same time, it means you can go to Southampton a million times and still find new things.
Yeah.
And that is kind of what keeps us going, I think.
So, I mean, talking about the PL and USA stuff, I think that's a good transition, and that's and like I think people, even if they are not Southampton fans, or even if they're not living in the United States, I think they're that account is followed by enough people that people will have kind of been a little bit familiar with that at least. And like I just wonder, like I think on one hand we look at it and go like, oh, this guy gets to do all of this stuff, this is so lucky and whatever. And having just like been to England one time and tried to get on a train and use the tube and like not get delayed and transferred to a bus or for bus replacement or whatever, like it's not all fun and games, it's not all just easy stuff. But like when the opportunity came around for you to do this, in your head, did it make sense? Like, yeah, this is how we can do this and this is how we can follow through with this? Or was it like a kind of one of those moments where you weren't quite sure how it was going to get done, but you were willing to try it or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, like, first off, I was honored and like a bit shocked that they wanted me to be a part of it regardless. I never really thought that I would be a good host or good on-camera talent or anything like that. So ultimately, like, I was shocked to begin with. But yeah, I think like I knew in the back of my mind, and we knew in the back of our minds what we wanted to try to do, which is kind of peel back the curtain on the more experiential stuff. So to this point, like I still have not done a really good job of the initial remit, is like, who's the interesting pie lady outside Anfield who's been there for 70 years and blah, 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 or go find and kind of talk to the fan of Southampton who flies from, I think, Norway every single game. Mm-hmm. Those interesting fan stories, I think, are still that's the hardest part. And ultimately that is what I have not done a good enough job on. But the remit of like getting to go kind of explore that culture around each one of these clubs and the stadiums and the towns is amazing. And it's kind of an addiction. It's super fun to get to think creatively about the stories that we want to try to tell, knowing that there's no end to it. Ultimately, like for me I think the metric for success is like, so Fulham and Chelsea are separated by, I don't know, like 4 miles, 3 miles, something like that, maybe even less, yet are two very different clubs. Mm-hmm. How does that happen? Is there any reflection on, the neighborhoods that they're in? Well, they're both kind of in the same neighborhood. One is, a massive stadium. One is one of the smallest stadiums, owned by an American, owned by a Russian, blah, blah, blah. How did it get to this point? Was it always like this? Well, Chelsea kind of had a, less than savory time period in the 80s and that kind of stuff. Like there's so much to it that like you can't hope to bottle it up. And I think the fun part for me too is trying to figure out what people over here don't know that we don't know back home, or what we do know back home that people don't really understand. So for instance, I went to Manchester for the Manchester Derby. It was at City. And I asked a fan in a pub what the difference between a Manchester United fan and a Manchester City fan was. Like, surely there's some sort of cultural difference or whatever it may be. And his answer, he was a City fan for life. He grew up in Manchester. His answer was, well, it's just based on where you grew up. If you're from west of Manchester, like Salford, then you're a United fan. If you're from, east of Manchester, which is where City is, then you're a City fan. And for me, it was so cut and dry. Uh-huh. Like that's the Manchester experience. Basically, that's his Manchester experience. Like, what do you mean? Like, it's not a decision. It's always been this way. It's where I was born. It's like my family. And I think we obviously know that back home. But what I love about the fan stories coming out of the U.S. is that they're so unique. It's like, how did you become a Southampton fan? It's probably not because you were born in Southampton and that was the easy thing to do. Right. It was some decision that you made early on. You identified with the club more so than Brighton or more so than anyone else up and down the coast or up and down the country. And it's those stories that I find most interesting. But over here, it's not really, we don't get as many of those stories. It's just more like practicality, which I think is kind of refreshing in a way, but ultimately makes it more challenging to get some of those fan story experiences out of people, especially in pubs when they're not really thinking about telling a great story.
As you're doing the show, I can only imagine that doing a lot of the things that you do, you spend a lot of time working in like Premiere Pro and After Effects and all that stuff. But like, how much prep goes into, how much prep are you doing for that 3 or 4 minutes that we see before you ever get on a train or before you ever do this? Like just give us a rough idea of how many kind of how much preparation goes into each episode.
Yeah. So when we first started, it was literally, hey, this is the game we've got you a ticket to. There wasn't really much direction outside of like, these are the kind of stories that we want to be telling. Can you find an interesting pie lady who's been outside Anfield or whatever it may be? We're starting to put more effort into the scripting just so we know that we're not missing opportunities. I can't think of specific examples, but I'm sure if I went back and looked at the earlier ones we did, it's like, man, there was so much more that I just kind of glossed over or didn't really iterate correctly or didn't connect back to the tune in or anything like that. So now we're trying to do, I try to put together a script every week that goes over to the team on Wednesday. So knowing that we're going to go to a game on Saturday or Sunday, the script goes over on Wednesday, and it's literally just 15 talking points. I think we've kind of identified, at least right now, we're still very much testing things top to bottom, but we've kind of identified, 15 slides, I think, is a good enough length that if people are watching long, but it's too short, and it gives you the space to kind of tell stories within. Mm-hmm. But anything over 20, I think, is not from my point of view, but from the viewer point of view, it's just too much. It's like, I'm not going to spend my time watching this. So we try to keep it to 15 talking points, but 2 of those are, I'm going into the stadium, swipe up to watch the game, and then here's the match graphic and kind of what to expect later on and tune in stuff. Uh-huh. So it's really down to 13, and then one of them is an intro, and 3 of them are kind of the outro after the game and thoughts and predictions, like wrap up and that kind of stuff. So it ends up being closer to, I don't know, if I had to guess, maybe 8 Instagram story slides to tell people something interesting that they don't hopefully already know about this place. And it's not really a ton of space, especially if you're doing it in chunks that are small enough for people to not want to move on and tune out.
Yeah.
So it ends up being very much like, okay, I know we're going to end up talking about the teams that are lining up and the players and who I think is going to win or who the fans think are going to win. But the real juice of the story is like, what makes Newcastle Newcastle? And how does this town fuel this club or vice versa?
Yeah.
Or for this weekend, what is it how did the Merseyside Derby come to be? How do people choose to be red or blue? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'll ever get to a perfect story, but there is a little bit more intentional effort these days to script out the idea ahead of time. And then in terms of like After Effects stuff, I haven't really done a ton of pre-prepping of graphics and whatnot. Maybe there have been a couple where I spent some time in the week leading up, but more often than not, it's like, do I have a 4-hour train ride? Okay, well, I'm going to have some time to do some editing. And I try to shoot stuff like on my way to the train so I can try to make an intro slide that's eye-catching or tell people that this is going to be different from just an average Instagram story segment.
Yeah. Sure.
But if it's a shorter segment, or if it's a shorter trip, then I don't really have a ton of time to do the fun, quirky edit stuff to hopefully catches people's eyes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can tell you that I think you're doing a great job. Like it's, I want to say 99% of them. And I also am one of these people that like, if I see somebody's story has just 1,000 things, like I'm probably not even going to watch the first one. So
yeah, I'm out.
Yeah. It's like, well, like, nah, this story is probably not that great. So I'll just move on. And I can tell like when I put the episode previews up there, I keep them under a minute for the previews, but like it's now like it's for Instagram stories and you can just see the drop off in numbers, from 1 to 4. It's, when I get one that holds somebody all the way through, where the numbers kind of stay consistent, it's like, wow, that's, I did something there. Do I know what it is? No. Can I figure it out? Like maybe, but like it's just a weird kind of thing. I mean, I kind of asked you before about where you mentioned that you were, you are some like nervous or you doubt yourself a little bit, but like, what is the worry there when you do the stories for Premier League in USA? Like what, like, and how do you put that aside? And I realize like we are talking for a long time, but as long as you're okay, like I am interested. And I think like this is the stuff that like will help somebody, like maybe just clears one kid's doubt, like you said, like and encourages them to go for it. That this is why I'm going down this rabbit hole, I guess.
Yeah, no, definitely. Trust me, I've got time, and it's what I love to talk about as well. I still think today the hardest thing for me to do is talk to fans before a game. If I don't have the time during the week because I work full time, or sometimes more than full time, it seems. I don't really have the time in the week to pre-produce things and find fans who are willing to meet me, before the game, behind the pub, whatever it may be. So a lot of it comes down to, if I need a fan story, it has to be someone that I find in a pub or right out front of the stadium, and that they're not in a rush to get inside. And on a match day, when people have had beers or they're waiting for friends or whatever it may be, like more often than not, they don't want to talk to an American stranger who is asking you to be on their Instagram story without having any idea who they are, what it's about, or like what it is. And I still haven't really been able to explain what I'm doing very, very quickly and efficiently to people who don't know what Instagram stories are. So more often than not, it ends up being kids. You'll see this, like anytime I'm getting an opinion with a bunch of fans, more often than not, it's kids or people that are like 18, 19 who know what Instagram stories is, and I can show them that I'm logged into the Premier League thing.
Yeah.
Because there's some sort of trust there. But if I go up to a bunch of middle-aged fans and say, hey, can you tell me about, the difference between Liverpool and Arsenal, or Liverpool and Everton, and do it within a 15-second bite, they look at me like I've got 3 heads. So I think getting fans to talk is one thing and share their story. Getting it to be, and I don't know really the way to put this, but like getting it to be interesting enough within 15 seconds for someone at home that is probably still watching in bed, who's tired and isn't really focused. Like that's the hardest part, is to dilute the stuff to, or maybe not dilute it, but to double down on things that are actually interesting. That if I'm half asleep and maybe still hungover in bed on the West Coast and it's like 6 a.m. before the game starts, what is it that this person's telling me that I'm actually interested in? I think there have been a lot of people interviewed in bars about soccer and their fandom and all that stuff. And some of it's really good, and some of it honestly can be trash sometimes. And so my biggest goal in life is to find those stories that catch people, find those stories and be able to tell them in a way that people are willing to stay and listen for.
Yeah. When you actually get into the matches, does doing this job or whatever you want to call it, does it change the way that you watch the matches? Like, are you constantly worried about content, which is a word that like I realize is like a standard, but it's like something I can't say without cringing. So sorry.
No, it's all good.
But like, I mean, has it changed the way you kind of look at a match, or are you able to kind of like compartmentalize and just enjoy because you are a football fan, like first and foremost?
Yeah, it's the answer is it is 100% changed because I have not been in the stands before kickoff yet this year. Because every single game there's Wi-Fi issues or cell signal issues at like within a mile radius. So I'll be like ticket in hand, about to go and just trying to push up this last, swipe up to watch the game. Hope you guys enjoy. Mm-hmm. I'm going in, and it's not going because there are 60,000 people in the same area using cell service. So I then have to run, literally like I'll run a mile away from the stadium to get cell service, wait for it to finally like register and then the stuff to upload and then run back. And by that time, this is the part that I'm so embarrassed about because I should be better at managing my time now that I've done this like 20 times. But without fail, I could be in a place 8 hours ahead of time and I'll still be late to the game. That is like, that part kills me. So yes, and to answer the question, yes, it changes because I missed the first 20 minutes. But it also makes me focus much more on kind of the balance of who's playing well and regardless of the result, because aside from City winning at home, most of the time, the club that I'm going to see loses or draws. So I can't always just expect them to win and then talk about how great they played. It has to be, okay, maybe assuming that they're going to lose 4-0, what is the shining spot or what is maybe the downfall? What are the things that they have to work on? But like I said earlier in the 3 words that I described myself, I'm an optimist. Like I'm not here to rag on anybody or anyone's club or anything like that. If someone just got throttled 8-0, I'm looking for the outside back who, after the 7th goal went in, still was clapping his hands and telling his guys to, like, come on, we're better than this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm looking for the bright spots in this stuff regardless. And I hope that it doesn't ever come off as generic post-match thoughts, which I think sometimes you kind of run in the danger of like, they lost 2-0, but there's a lot of young talent out there, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Like, I still want it to be interesting and engaging, but that is ultimately what I end up watching for during the game.
Okay.
And quickly, kind of anecdotally, a good friend of mine over here, Danny Carbassian, he's been on the story a couple times. He's a scout at Arsenal. He's the first American to score for Arsenal. So he played for them a couple years ago, but he's now a scout. And I spend a lot of time kind of listening to Danny, and we've gone to games together and kind of watching how he watches the game. He couldn't care less what the score is. Right. From a scout point of view, he's watching a list of very specific things to get a picture of a player or, a back four or a striker up top, whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. And I've learned that his way of watching the game is very different from mine. I'm more concerned about how are chances being created and who's finishing them. Mm-hmm. Danny's watching like the center back when everyone else is up for a corner. I found it been really interesting to try to kind of mimic what he or how he approaches watching a game.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of refreshing to know that like I'm not the only weirdo who tries to do that or who is interested in that stuff. So it's nice. All right. Like I have a couple more things for you, if that's okay. Like,
Yeah.
So just kind of quick fire questions, related to the Premier League and USA Instagram story, or as you call it, I think it's on the ground, right?
Yes.
Favorite like town or city that you've been to, like maybe most interesting place that you've been to so far?
Great question. Either Burnley or Newcastle.
All right. What about just stadium, not atmosphere, but stadium? Favorite stadium so far?
Ooh, it's got to be Craven Cottage. Although Brighton is sick.
Yeah.
There are a lot of this is not quick fire. There are a lot of like the thing that I love most is no matter how similar some of these stadiums are, they're all completely different, and that's been the most fun part. The atmosphere is completely different too, but the stadiums are just fascinating.
Best atmosphere?
Liverpool, Anfield.
Best food, whether it's city or in the stadium itself?
Ooh, I'm for sure a homer here. I think a lot of the stadiums have really good food, but the cottage pie at Craven Cottage is unlike any other. I'm licking my lips as I say this. It's so good.
Nicest or most gracious player, manager, coach, team rep you've ever met while doing this?
Watford. The comms guy who's, in many ways, his job is to say no to things. Literally, like, you put me on the pitch. If we're being honest, like, you put me in positions that I'm probably not supposed to be in. And he, like, I was kind of unsure about it, and I was texting the guys at the Premier League, like, hey, like, this is the situation, what should we do? And they were ultimately like, look, if he's telling you to go there, like, go there. So he cleared it with Man United. It was at Watford. It was Man United game. It was a big TV game for them. It was big for them to reach the US audience. And he put me on the pitch when the players were walking out, put me in the dugout when, like, the team were warming up. It was just like a lot of the stuff that I just, I'm not even holding it against any other club. Like, probably legally there's a contract somewhere saying that I shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
His attitude is basically just like, this means a lot to us as a club. Like, I'm happy to ask for forgiveness later, if need be. So that was, like, amazing. It was so sick.
Yeah.
And what a great club, just top to bottom. Like, people just, it was amazing.
Yeah. Are you your own harshest critic?
Yeah, definitely. What I will say is that the group of guys that we have working on the Premier League and the US account just across the board, like, thankfully I get to do fun stuff on the weekends, but they're guys that put in a lot of long hours and put in a lot of effort to make sure that this is a useful and fun engagement outlet for the US fan.
Yeah.
Like, those guys are amazing. And thankfully they give me really, really good feedback and tell me when stuff sucks. And, like, that is the greatest thing I could ever ask for, genuinely. Like, the worst thing I could imagine is doing this without getting any feedback. It would be, like, miserable if everyone's just like, yeah, it's great all the time, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, clear, like, I need something more than that. And those guys, at this point, thankfully, are open and honest with me. And I hope the fans, whoever are watching this, like, I genuinely hope that if you guys love something or if you guys hate something, that you feel comfortable telling me. You could DM it to me, whatever, because I genuinely want to know. I want to make it better.
Yeah. All right. There's some questions that I didn't write down that I have for you. Similar kind of stuff. Like, to the US fan, like, who is the most recognizable person that you could text right now that you would get a text back? Like, who's in your phone, or whose DMs are you in that you would get a response that somebody from the US would go like, what is that? How does that happen?
Good question. I'd have to go probably either. Wow, that's a good question. Probably either Heather O'Reilly or Steve Nash.
Jesus. Damn.
Two great people, like, great human beings. Really, really awesome people.
Yeah. I remember last year you were going to a lot of Fulham matches, and Heather O'Reilly was over there. She was playing, and so you guys were at Fulham matches together. I remember going like how does this happen? Like, what is this? But it was great, and she is just loved by everyone over here. You know, if you listen, I listen to the Blazers podcast, and they absolutely adore her. And yeah, it's always want her to do well. Always root for her when she comes on the pitch. Is it awkward when a follower, recognizes you on the street?
Yeah, sometimes. I'm still not. It's happened a handful of times, and every single time I walk away regretting the way I handled it. Like, I don't think I've ever handled it poorly in terms of, like, oh no, like, let's not take a photo, blah blah blah. But every single time, I'm like shocked. It's still very surprising, and it hasn't. I'm not here to say, like, it happens all the time, blah blah blah. Like, it's happened a couple times in random places, like at Wimbledon one time, and at games I'm not as shocked just because it's a soccer audience, right? But at a tennis match, when a kid asks you for a selfie, I'm like, does he know? Like, I'm not a famous person. Like, who does he think I am? Does he think I'm Paul Rudd or something like that? But every single time it's happened, I'm just like, God, like, I wish I got the kid's name, or I wish I got his handle, or I wish we took a photo on my phone, or like, I wish I just took the time to ask him about him. Like, I'm not a celebrity. I'm not a famous person. I get to do cool stuff, and I'm so lucky for that. But, like, if I walk away feeling like I'm a celebrity, then shame on me. Like, if I don't make that person walk away thinking like, hey, I met Chris Macchi, and he's just, like, genuinely an awesome dude. Like, you never would have thought that he was a recognizable person or anything like that. Like, that, I think, is ultimately what I would want my legacy to be.
Like, I can say that when I went over to to London. Like, I'd never been out of the country before. I'd never been out of the United States. And the entire family last Easter time went over, and I felt really awkward because I had friends that I had met through doing the podcast, and had people over there that I knew, and they knew I was coming. I announced it on the show. It kind of went out on Twitter that I was going, and I remember feeling so like awkward, like showing up and having somebody go like, "Oh yeah, you're the American guy that was coming over this week." I was like, can you not say that out loud? Like, I just want to be, I just want to be here. Like, you know, like the look on my face as I walk into the stadium, because it was at the London Stadium, just after an international break. But the match before was when they had the pitch invasion, and they were throwing stuff at the owner's box and stuff like that. So like, I was walking into kind of like what I understood to be a kind of contentious situation. I just want to take it all in, you know. Yeah. And some guy in the bathroom goes like, "Hey, I recognize you. You're the American guy." I'm like, "Hey, would you just shut up and pee?" Like, you know, and let's just move on with our days.
I've seen this movie before, Green Street Hooligans. It doesn't turn out well. I'm the American guy no longer.
Yeah. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who wants to make it in whatever line of work it is, doesn't have to be media, doesn't have to be sport, just if they happen to hear this thing from you, who's kind of taken a path that is not something I'm not sure I could do. What piece of advice would you give them?
Don't be afraid to chase it, no matter what it looks like. So like for you, someone who loves your job, could never imagine yourself moving across the sea or whatever it may be, like starting up, that's a massive success. And I think a lot of people would never, myself included, like I can't imagine the time and effort that goes into creating a great podcast. That kind of stuff, like define your own success. If you want to work in soccer, figure out what angle you want to take and work in soccer. If you love data science, then become a soccer scientist. Figure out the analytical side of the game. Make your own lane if you need to. But by no means should you subscribe to what the world currently tells you the opportunity is and chase that. If you want to be a doctor, be a doctor. If you want to be a doctor and work in soccer, be a team doctor. Like, figure out your own path and chase after that, because no one else will tell you the way to do it. And no matter how many great mentors you have in a lifetime, at the end of the day, what they're going to tell you is that you need to figure out what you love and figure out how to get there.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate this so much. Like I've told you before, like I was a little bit nervous. And that does it for episode 103 of the Southampton Delivery Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you've enjoyed it. Special thanks this week goes out to Chris Macchi, who spent well over 2 hours of his time letting some guy from California who supports a team in the Premier League ask him a bunch of questions that he probably never thought anybody would want to ask him. But I really think that there is a lot of value in there for a lot of people. And so thank you. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. If you're not sure how to follow Chris or not sure how to get a hold of him, you can do that on Twitter or Instagram. On both platforms, he is at MXCCHI. There are links and things in the show notes, so go read up, check it out, enjoy the ride, because it's a fun time. If you want to follow this show on Twitter or Instagram, I'm not as much fun as Chris, but still there. So we're at SFCDELL_IVERY on Twitter and Instagram. We're at facebook.com/SFC Delivery. There's no underscore in the Facebook address. Now, this episode wasn't like normal episodes, but we will be back next week with one of those. And our partner page, the Southampton page on Twitter and Instagram, for all your kind of Saints news and needs, they help make sure that comes out every week. So we'll be back with that. The logo is designed by Matt Beeling of the We Are Southampton page on Instagram. Matt has been a friend of the show since day one, and he's now going to be doing graphics and stuff for the Saints media team. So congratulations to Matt on your new adventure. All music for the show comes courtesy of the Free Music Archive at freemusicarchive.org. The intro song is Epic Song by Boxcat Games. The end of show credits that you're listening to right now is Aim is True by Poddington Bear. Links to all those things are in the show notes. And if you're enjoying it, please consider subscribing. You can do that on iTunes, Stitcher, Acast, Google Play, TuneIn Radio, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're really, really enjoying it, consider leaving a review or becoming a supporter on patreon.com/SFC Delivery. There is a link in the show notes if you wish to do that. You get some extra stuff, and it really helps make sure the show keeps going. So with all that said, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you've enjoyed it. Happy New Year. And until next time, remember that together we march on.